Hey y'all, it's Saturday. I am chilling and relaxing. I had a good week. I got a good amount of work done. So that's why I'm making a video instead of writing about the thing that I want to talk about today. If you don't know, I'm a writer. If you have followed me in the past because of videos I made, I am a writer. So you can find my writing on Patreon. You can find my work there if you just search my name. Chances are there's a link in my bio wherever you're seeing this. If you're interested, I write. I've realized in the last few years that I write primarily about storytelling. So one way that shows up is that I write a lot about movies, but it also shows up in the fact that I write a lot about politics and culture. But even when I'm writing about politics and culture, I'm really writing about the stories that we're telling in those environments, those arenas, those landscapes. For example, I've written a lot through the years about white supremacy and white nationalism. And really the way that I've written about that has been about kind of comparing the story that they're telling to the evidence that we have, right? And so, you know, is there any reality to the story they're telling? And there's really not, which is why I wrote about it for a long time, because they're just, you know, telling different versions of the same lies. But so I've realized in the last couple of years that what I've really been doing for a lot of my life is trying to tease out and understand as well as I can as much of what is it that storytelling does for us as human beings. And that kind of touches on what I want to talk about today. And I'm making a video because if I start writing about it, it's going to take me a couple days, and I told myself I'm not working this weekend because I did so much work during the week. But so what I wanted to talk about is that in the last like decade or so, maybe a little bit longer, the conversation's been around, but it's been more forefront the last decade, a little bit more, that this idea that remakes, sequels, returning to what's called IP. And if you're not familiar, IP is intellectual property. And what that means is a story that is owned. So it's a story that's been told before and somebody owns the copyright to that story and its characters. And, you know, they hold the rights to be able to tell that story either on screen or what have you. That's what intellectual property is. So there's been for a while, there's been this discussion that kind of frames IP and remakes and sequels, the fact that we keep returning to different stories and different characters as like a bad thing, right? And that, you know, that we're not getting enough new storytelling. And now let me say, I love stories. I love new storytelling. I love original stories. Sinners was probably my favorite movie last year because of how different it was, because of how innovative and inventive it was as storytelling on screen, right? Companion was an original story. That was one of my favorite stories of 2024. And so I love original storytelling. But when I'm thinking about this conversation about like remakes and sequels and IP, I've started to think about the fact that when we look at storytelling and our history with storytelling, revisiting stories, going back to stories and characters is something we do a lot. Like we do it a lot. You know, you can even take like folklore and look at the fact that gets retold throughout history, right? And There can even exist, you look at different periods of time and you pick a location and a folk story from that place, like that place itself. And it'll have certain dimensions. There'll be, identifiable elements of it. And then go, 1,000, 1,200 miles away and see pretty much the same story. But it's been kind of reiterated. It's been kind of changed to fit the conditions that are that in that place 1,200 miles away from that other one, You can go back to Rome and the fact that they just basically stole a whole bunch of stuff from the Greeks and retrofitted it to fit Rome, where the Greek version didn't, right? And that has got me kind of thinking about like religion. Because religion, if like me, you're a humanist, religion is just different sets of stories that we tell that give us some sense of organization of the universe, right? They tell us how things work and how to be human, how to live together, what are the kind of rules there, right? And storytelling as a whole, like even if you set religion aside, that's one of the things that storytelling does for us. Even if you take like what we think of as secular storytelling, it's one of the things it does for us. It helps us interrogate all that stuff. What is it to be alive? What is it to be human? What are the best ways to live together? What are the best ways to organize ourselves? All that. Like it's just something we do with storytelling. And if you look at religion, that does that iterative thing too, right? And so when you look at that, it kind of tells us, it seems to anyway, I think, it tells us that that's something we need from storytelling, right? And I think the other part of this is if you look at human civilization, when religion has enough power in a culture and society, one of the things that it does is attempt to shut down, to oppress any story that exists outside the umbrella of whatever specific religion it is that has that power, right? It attempts to just erase it. Because by nature of anything existing, any other stories existing outside that umbrella, just the existence of those stories creates questions about the story that the religion is telling. And so I think in the way that we're thinking about things like film and television and books today, and our kind of continuously going back to these same stories, going back to these same characters, I think first of all, we have to admit that that's obviously something, there's a purpose that serves for us within the larger umbrella of storytelling itself, right? We use storytelling in some way that is that reiterative, reinterpretive, going back to these things. It does something for us, right? I think that can't be argued. We do it in every form of storytelling we have, pretty much, right? In every arena of storytelling that we have. And so I think we can't just deny that. I think it's not smart to do that. And I think it's like saying that the sky isn't blue. Like it's just something we do. And we're obviously going to keep doing. I think the other part of that is if you appreciate a secular worldview, yes, You have to be willing to allow for secular storytelling to serve some of those purposes that religion does. And it's obvious that one of the reasons we keep religion around is that it does keep telling the same stories, right? You think about 1608, you go back to 1608, and I don't know, even if it's here when it was the colonies, right? You go back to 1608, there was a person standing at a pulpit or whatever you want to call it, and they were a preacher and a mom, a rabbi, and they were telling a story to people whose conception of life in the world was completely and totally different than ours is today. But it's Saturday. Tomorrow on Sunday, it's Saturday. There are some places now where there are people telling those same stories that were being told in 1608. Tomorrow, there will be people telling those same stories that were told in 1608. The people who are hearing them have a completely and totally different conception of life than when those stories were told in 1608. But we're still telling those stories. And that seems to serve a function for us as human beings, right? And I think you can't ignore that. And I think as well that we need to take that into account when we have these conversations. And that the argument that says, well, so there's two sides to the argument today that says that this going back to IP, going back to that doing remakes, sequels, all of this, that it's bad. The arguments kind of are twofold. One of them is that it's just a cash grab by the industries themselves. And there's some truth to that, right? There is some truth to that. But the part that doesn't take into consideration is that it must be serving something for audiences to keep going back to those same stories, right? And then here's like the other part is, so within the last month, this is roughly the last month, maybe a month and a half, The Bride was released in theaters, right? Maggie Gyllenhaal wrote and directed The Bride. That is she's taking pieces, elements of The Bride of Frankenstein, right? That was where that character originated in the 1930s. But it has very, very little resemblance to that story, right? This is something totally different, right? So there's that. And then there's also, within the last 2 years, I don't remember exactly when it was, but Creature Commandos was put out by DC. It is an animated show that was overseen, at least, by James Gunn. And Creature Commandos features a version of The Bride of Frankenstein 2. And it is real different than what Maggie Gyllenhaal just did. Now, there are some similarities, right? And those similarities come from the culture, the fact that they are both coming from the same culture in more or less the same point in time, right? And they're coming from the same root, which was The Bride of Frankenstein, the movie, and the origination of the character. But they're very different at the same time. And so there's something about that we apparently need from storytelling. And I think that if you appreciate a secular worldview, at least being able to challenge the dominant religions in a society, then you have to give people the thing that does within religion, right? You have to give them, you have to make that available to them outside of that umbrella of religion. And I think that's a lot of ways what this does. And so, you know, I think to zone off these discussions specifically and completely only to, well, the industry, I think is a little too reductive. I think it's also like kind of cynical to just say, well, audiences are lazy, right? They don't want to engage with news stories, all that. And I think in a way, like, it's as lazy to say that as it is to accuse audiences of being, if that makes any sense. Because we do have to consider that storytelling serves us in a bunch of different ways, so many different ways, like we can barely even map them, right? And so I think when you ask that question, how is this serving us, right? That question then I think informs what's happening a little differently. And it can also, I think, lead us to a better approach to art that serves us better, you know? And I think a lot of the people who write and talk about this stuff, their experiences have been so shaped by being in that industry, the industry of criticism, the industry of, you know, analysis, all of that, that there's a little bit of a tunnel view, you know? And that happens to all of us anytime we spend that much time dedicated in a specific industry like that. It's not a personal criticism. But I think that's part of what's happening. And I just wanted to make a video and kind of talk about that to maybe expand the parameters of the discussion a little bit. And so maybe we're not just constantly hitting the same talking points, basically, because that's not really useful. It doesn't provide anything new. And if we had gotten to the right answers, we'd probably be using them. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, if you're interested, I'm going to be putting up a video this weekend about Ready or Not 2. There's a piece on my Patreon that is spoiler free. Because I told myself I'm not going to be writing this weekend, I'm going to be making a video about that will have spoilers. Because I want to talk about a bunch of the things I think it did well. There was some writing and stuff in there that I thought was really good. And so if you're interested in that, come on back. But if not, I hope you're having a good weekend anyway.